I'm going to bring things a little bit down to earth again, and actually I'll probably link in with some of the aspects around advertising, digital marketing later on. I'm a technology industry analyst and consultant, so I'm probably more of a forecaster than a futurist most of the time. And I'm certainly forecasting free beer in the near future, so I'm not going to be taking up too much more of your time. So I want to talk about the humble phone call. I was at a party recently, and someone said to me, you know, the only people who phone me these days are my parents and people I don't want to talk to. Everyone else has got a better way of getting in touch with me. And I'll come on to this in a minute, but there's a real sort of sense that the sort of phone call is nearing obsolescence. And the question is whether or not, particularly in businesses, but also personally, whether we can reinvent it. So, a bit of history rather than future. Let's have a look at the past. 1876 was pretty good. We had the four-cycle internal combustion engine invented, and we had the phone call by a certain Mr. Alexander Graham Bell. And that was really quite an impressive achievement. And what it meant is that we could start to replicate what I'll call proxy phone. Proxy phone is roughly what I'm doing now, albeit with a microphone. I am talking close. Yeah, and this is how we interact normally in a social or a business context with people when we are face-to-face with them. And there's quite a lot of nuance around communication. You can whisper, you've obviously got the body language and visual aspect, but you can interrupt, you can come back to a thread in a conversation, whatever. There's a lot more than we would normally expect from a phone call. But, to be honest, for 130 years ago, that was pretty good. You know, we were able to speak at a distance in a approximately similar way, the way we speak when we're in the same room as someone. And so, yeah, as a result, we've had one of the most transformative industries and technology innovations. I don't know what that is, in the planet. Someone's transforming the fabric of the ship behind me, it sounds. And the numbers are quite staggering. I mean, there's sort of numbers like trillions get thrown around quite a lot in terms of minutes of use. I think it's probably now about more like $500-600 billion a year. Depends how you calculate it, really. But there's probably about 4 billion individual users who regularly use the phone. So, yeah, and a number more who occasionally do, where you've got maybe shared phones in villages in the emerging world. But what's happening, and I'll try not to bore you too many charts here, is we're at peak phone or past it. Whilst absolutely, if you live in India and you haven't had a phone before at all, you will start using it more because, you know, obviously coming from a low base. But for over a 5-year period, the total number of call minutes in the UK dropped by 14%. And in fact, last year, it fell another 5% alone. A lot of that drop was in fixed phones, but actually mobile phones are flat, and it depends a little bit on pricing. We've moved in the UK to having all-you-can-eat, most of us anyway, phone calls and texts. But I'm pretty sure that if I gave everyone in this room another 100 or another 1,000 minutes a month, you wouldn't use them. You have more than enough. I find that I use ever less of my phone minutes that Vodafone gives me. And what I do use is often for pre-arranged phone calls, for conference calls or something like that. And the problem is that, it comes back to the original comment about people I don't want to talk to, is it was a really neat invention 130 years ago. But, to be honest, the world's moved on a bit, and we've got this fairly antiquated system of communication, which is interruptive. In fact, the word call is quite important here. So, for example, if I call over to David in the front row, that's actually quite rude. It's me commanding attention. I'm calling and demanding attention. It's much more interruptive than, say, our normal behaviour with Skype, where you perhaps start with a couple of chat messages, and then you go, are you okay for a call? Maybe hang on 2 minutes. Or I'll go and get my headset, or whatever it happens to be. So it's more of a sort of polite escalation. And this is very different to, say, the 1950s, where if you got a phone call, it was expensive. So you were pretty sure that whoever was phoning you was phoning about something important because it was worth them spending the money. Whereas as phone calls get cheaper, you get more spam, you get more interruption, and you add this on with ever busier multitasking lifestyles, low tolerance of people talking to you when you don't want to be talked to. It becomes awkward. And also we have this issue, it's one size fits all. We have a monolithic service, irrespective of whether you're negotiating a $10 billion merger or whether you're calling your mother for a chat or working out which pub to meet. And you'd think that these days we would actually have an app for gossip and an app for concluding business deals with different sorts of characteristics. Maybe encryption for one, maybe a sort of social component to the other. There's also a lot of learned behavior, etiquette, how we use the phone. So if you think about, oh hi there, it's that's Dean Bubley speaking. Yeah, you've got all this learned, unnatural etiquette comparison to how you might have a social drink over a beer or a coffee. It's also expensive for the most part, and it's quite heavily regulated. It has strange implications. So, for example, we charge for phone calls by the minute, which doesn't align with value. I have never had a long phone call which I would honestly say is more valuable than a short one. We don't pay for movies by the minute, so why do we pay for calls? And part of the reason is legacy of how we came to build phone networks 50, 100 years ago. But part of it is because governments and regulators insist that companies count minutes, and that's how pricing and regulation is tracked. So we've got this sort of useful but slightly clunky and creaky and increasingly annoying technology. Whereas, if you look at every other way we communicate, we use the best tool for the job. So we've got a ton of apps on our phones of different messages, different maybe now voice communication apps as well. And so the sorts of things you use Snapchat for, or the Microsoft link in your office, or Instagram or Facebook, there's all slightly different purposes to these. And I think this is the way we're going to see phone calls and also video as well evolving. There's another important thing here. That's the Uber app symbol. There's a bunch of stuff we used to use phone calls for, which we now don't. Who actually calls for taxis? Certainly in London these days. You don't use an app. Not because it's cheaper, but because it's better. You actually don't have to speak to a busy taxi dispatch office. You get a little map of where the driver is, when they're going to arrive, and occasionally you might need to call the driver to say, where are you, I can't see you, or I'm running 2 minutes late. And so that's the exception rather than the default. And this is part of the problem. When I speak to a lot of telecoms companies, and I will put this exact question up in front of CEOs of telecom companies around the world, and you'd think for their core product, they might have an idea what unmet human needs they're satisfying. But they don't. I ask, why do people make phone calls? And I usually get an answer which is, people want to talk to each other. Yeah, but why? What is it they're doing? What are the top 5 reasons? If I asked an airline, they would say, 12% of our seats are people going to conferences, people going on vacation, going to visit families, sales meetings, whatever it happens to be. I'm pretty sure BA has a fairly good breakdown of why people buy airline seats. But if I ask that question to, say, Vodafone or to BT, they do not have. They might be able to split it down between business and consumer, but they won't be able to have a good analysis. This chart I made up. I've never seen anyone to have a chart which said, split down between what proportion of traffic on the phone is gossip versus calling a taxi versus spam versus, I've got 5 minutes to kill, I haven't talked to him for ages. But unless we know this, we can't invent voice or perhaps video messaging applications that fit the individual purposes that are behind it. We've ended up with this monolith of phone calls, which is undifferentiated. Now, to give an example, there might be a difference if I'm calling a friend from a beach versus I'm doing a business call where I want to close a deal. There's some subtle differences. So let's take, for example, the background noise. If I'm closing a business deal, I want to have the background noise pretty much silenced. So I want to hear everything and my client wants to hear everything. But if I'm calling from a beach, actually the sounds of the waves behind me is part of the experience I'm trying to communicate with my friend or my family. And we've got no ability at the moment with the phone system to sort of get that sort of level of nuance into the technology. This would probably annoy Tim Cook from Apple. Apple announced their music service this week to compete with Spotify. They weren't actually the first phone company to have a music service. This is a picture from 19th century Paris of what was called the théâtre phone, when people thought that the killer application for phones was listening to the opera from across town. So there's three routes that I see that we're going to actually improve the phone call or something which looks roughly like the phone. One is a better model of user interaction, and things like the changing the noise background noise is an example of that. And I'll talk about the others in the next couple of minutes, but there's putting communications, embedding it into apps or websites and so on. And then there's context and purpose, which really ties in with what Yates was saying just now, about understanding purpose, understanding your beliefs, understanding the sensor information around you, and tailoring communications to that. There's a bunch of technology buzzwords here. I'm not going to bore people with them. You can talk to me later if you really want to. So, embedded communications. This is something which is happening now, and it's a little bit under the radar. But if you I'll give an analogy. 10 years ago, you used to probably have, as well as browser, you had a Windows media player or a QuickTime player or a real media video player on your PC. And you watched video outside the browser. It was a separate thing. And then what's happened over the last 10 years is that starting with things like YouTube, but now it's everywhere, in adverts, it's in business training, it's in interviews, it's whatever it happens to be, compliance applications. Video now is part and parcel of your app and website, one-way streaming. And the same thing has happened with IM and chat. So you used to have Yahoo or AOL or MSN or whatever it was, but now every website has a chat function. Whether it's a social network like Facebook or whether it's a business application, you may even have a sort of a Facebook-style timeline or activity stream UI in a business application. So these things go from being separate applications to getting absorbed into apps or the web. And I think this is going to happen with two-way voice and also video communications in particular. So the one on the far left is actually Snapchat, which has got an embedded video call. It's press-to-video capability, which has voice as well. This is a website which does online music lessons. Now, in theory, you could do that over Skype, but this actually is a website which allows you to select and choose a tutor, pay for it, get the recommendations, and you then have two-way audio inside the website. And it's part and parcel of the app experience. And we'll see more and more of this. There's a lot of things which go beyond click to call, but sort of click to speak to an agent. There's a diversity of things in both business and consumer, which is following this model of putting communications into an app. And we're also seeing this being mashed up with the Internet of Things. That is called a double, from a company called Double Robotics. And it's sort of basically a cross between an iPad and a Segway, and it's designed for telepresence. It's a telepresence robot, and the idea is that if you've got an office in London, another one in New York, you steer this around if you're the boss, and you can peer over your employees' shoulders remotely, or sit at the conference table with this sort of slightly creepy thing on wheels, and that is not a phone call. That is another form of communication, in this case, again, video-based. But we're going to see audio being embedded into, it could be fitness trackers, it could be drones, it could be a security alarm, it could be a CCTV camera with just a two-way challenge and response with a central security guard. There's a technology here called WebRTC, which is, to my mind, the most important enabler of all this. It's part of HTML5, but there's a lot more to it than that. If you haven't heard about it and you are looking at some of these sort of interactive communications apps, this basically cuts the development time hugely, and it's what I think is one of the more transformative things I've seen for a long time. I want to talk about context. Context and contextual comms is, I think, a really important area which is going to come out over the next few years, and probably there's a roadmap between now and sort of 10 years when we get to the sort of personal assistant that knows everything and talks on your behalf. But there's a series of waypoints and interim phases that it'll go through. And what I mean by context is your communications application using some sort of knowledge about you and coming back to this question of why, what you're trying to achieve. So, for example, application context is where are you in the app? What are you doing? What web page are you on? Maybe this is an example of an app which is a sort of a cross between a language schools or sort of trying to find a partner to practice with, mixed with Tinder, where basically you swipe through profiles and that one I don't speak Welsh, Italian. And it's essentially, once you've got that contextual information about two people, you can then message and decide to have a language school partner speaking the appropriate language. And you're going to find this, another good example is going to be in customer service, where you'll be in a web page of a company, and the context of what you're doing and the page will go to the agent rather than having to start from scratch when you make a call. You might find also that this relates to, say, the Uber app, of rather than calling the driver, which is, oh, hi, this is Dean, is that that taxi? Yeah. Where are you parked? It's more of a walkie-talkie mode. So it'll be press the button to speak to the driver. You don't have to reveal your phone number. It'll just be, I'll be in the app, the driver will be in the app, where are you parked? And we'll both be in the context of the app immediately without having to go through all the preamble. Sensors. This is really important. And there's going to be a lot of interaction of the communications app and the capabilities of your device, either the phone or something else. Some of this is going to be quite rudimentary. Phones now have multiple microphones. So they can actually do analysis of the shape of the room you're in or work out if you're indoors or outdoors. So if you're doing things like conferencing, you might be able to work out that there's three people around a table, but one is further away, and you boost up the noise. Boost up the levels to make them a bit more, better heard. But the way that you'd work that out is that you'd use the orientation sensor on the phone. If it's flat, it's going to be a different user experience to if it's held up by your ear, maybe proximity sensor as well. There's at least one or two apps I know which actually are communications apps, which are like variations on Skype, that ask, can we get access to your orientation sensor? There's one called Torco, which is a good example, which blends voice messaging and two-way calls and chat in conversation streams. And that, I think, has a different user interface if you're looking at it or if you've got it to your ear. You may well find that the fitness band, I mean, in theory, you could imagine a call center queue a couple of years' time, where if the system realizes that your blood pressure is rising, maybe you get put up further up the queue. And the next one, in fact, related to that, is analytic context. And I think this is where big data and AI and machine learning comes in. This is an example which is really fascinating. It's called sentiment analysis. And this is particularly aimed at a video call center, but you can also get ones for voice systems, which analyze your voice. So if you are sounding angry on the phone, and you're on the phone to sort of your gas company or your phone company, they can change the agent's script or even put you through to someone with a soothing voice if you sound like you're getting pissed off. Now, this is right on the boundary between sort of creepy and not, but if it comes back to the purpose of what is your purpose is to get my phone bill sorted. What's the purpose of the other end? It's to have a happy customer and to keep the call as short as possible. You can start to see that there's some value there. And there's a bunch of other analytics contexts you can get, which is obviously from your web cookies, which are from, in the future, it may well be based on machine learning and predictions around what you might want to do in the future, and so where you will be or what you might be doing later today or next week. And I think that that is where this intersects with a lot of the stuff that Yates was talking about, where you've got the sort of the personal assistant and avatar from your devices, which enables communication to be better. There's a few other things around the sort of decomposing the nature of a phone call into its constituent bits of do you ring, do you interrupt people, and how do you filter calls. I've got a SIM card and a phone at home done for me by a software company in Islington that, I don't know about you, I hate anonymous inbound calls because they're usually people trying to sell me PPI insurance. And what this does is it intercepts a phone call coming to me if they've got caller withheld, and it intercepts it and it goes to a recorded announcement which says, the person you are calling does not accept anonymous calls for free. Please press 1 to reveal your number, or press 2 to go to the payment gateway. And the interesting thing there was it's a telecom application company, and they actually work with a large UK operator, and they put this together in a couple of hours. But it's that type of way of improving this sort of clunky phone experience. So I'm going to wrap up now, but just to give an example, imagine you've got a pet shop, you've got a website, and at the moment you might have the phone number on your website. You might have a click to call button because they've been around for a while. But when you do click to call, all it does is it rings as per a normal call and all the context is lost. So you're straight back to, yeah, hi, this is Dean. Yeah, I like cats. Whereas in theory they could work this out. So what you might have in future is something which is much more integrated, mashed up with social media. So you might have a call. You as a user, you might give your identity to the website in advance, and then either through permission or through inference, you might work out exactly what the person is. Either from a Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter, you could work out that they're a magician, let's say. And then some other contextual information from the website. So you know that they've been on the page looking for bunny rabbits. And so then it doesn't take an awfully smart AI to work out that that's a really hot sales prospect and you should put your best salesman on that. And so that's a sort of a simple and rather fatuous example, but the point here is that you're using contextual information which you wouldn't have had with an ordinary phone call. And you've brought together, who is this person, what do we think their purpose is, and do we have indicators that they are the type of people we really want to put our top agents. Maybe we give them a video call, which is expensive in terms of our time, but we think that we're going to get money out of it. And what you could potentially do then is, once you've completed the sale, you could perhaps transfer the whole call with all that context embedded in it to one of your affiliates who might be able to do a follow-up sale as well. So what we've got in the future is this combination of contextual communications, embedded communications, and decomposing of the way we create phone calls to make them more useful, less annoying, less interruptive, less intrusive. And there's going to be stages over the next 1, 3, 5, 10 years as to how much we can do of all these components. They're going to start, and some of this is already happening. I'm using real examples, a few of these things. But then you've got the sort of more sci-fi type end of things, 5, 10 years out, where you've got maybe an intelligent agent talking to another intelligent agent on your behalf. Now, whether they're doing it using voice is probably unlikely, but where you have one participant is human and one is essentially a robot, then I think that you will have a lot more of the rich contextual capabilities and learnt behaviours embedded into the phone call. Actually, one other thing I was going to mention around this is you expect to come up with fairly soon a feature called whisper mode, which is where you are on the phone to someone or a company, and then either your phone or the app says something one way in your ear while you're having the conversation. It could be a reminder, it could be decoding jargon, it could be some inside information that the guy you're talking to is a notorious either bore or liar. But the point is that it's going to be one way, and it will be the cloud or the application injecting into your side of the audio private information. So that's going to be coming in fairly shortly. I'll wrap up there.